Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Fear of Rain. So this would probably come at people as kind of like a horror movie, but a horror movie of a different kind. Like, really, we find out that our main character is to supposedly have schizophrenia, but like not a schizophrenia where you would have multiple personalities or something like that, a different kind. Really, I think they also try to like keep their bases covered, and they say it's like, well, maybe it's not 100% schizophrenia because the doctors like are not 100% exactly sure. Maybe it could be delusions or something else. Like, I'm not quoting the movie, but like I think they try to like keep their bases covered just in case an exact doctor is like, no, this is actually this thing, and so I think more than likely, like they try to keep their bases covered, or maybe there might be a different diagnosis of this in the future, so they're trying to just keep it vague. In all honesty, to where like who knows if this movie actually uh did its research. But I don't know. It seems like there are some characters in here that might like say that like why would this person do a thing that doesn't feel like a credited project. But anyways, so a lot of people might go through this movie and might be kind of wondering why the guy who plays Caleb might look familiar, because immediately once I started watching this movie, that's what I did. I all of a sudden looked through the IMDb and realized, oh my god, he's in like Happy Death Day, which I have seen. I'm like, so of course he would be perfect to be rolled into here, because like, yeah, of course you'd have a guy that's already done a horror movie go into technically this movie that is like horror adjacent, because we have this girl Rain who is to be haunted all the time by basically her seeing images that aren't exactly real, and so now she has to go through these line of questioning to where she then has to eventually start to rule things out if things are real or not. Again, like, so like the very beginning of this movie is to kind of give us like all of a sudden this horror movie vibe, and then all of a sudden that is to stop, and then it's just going, oh no, like this girl is just like having like a problem with her medication, and like, so there is a lot of interesting horror elements in here with Rain, which she is just being tortured by her mind, sadly. Um, but overall, like, I found this movie to be one rather intriguing, but also like on the opposite kind of thing. I also found it to also be a long stretch of a film, especially when this is about around 2 hours. I'm like, this movie did not need to be that long. But like, because I'm always just thinking of like there's some times when there's like a really long stretch of a film where I'm like, they could have cut here. They could have like they really could have cut this scene. Like, they really could have cut all of this. Like, why is any of this here? It seems like they're stretching things out. Um, but I thought this stuff with both Rain, who is the main character here, and Caleb, like I found that stuff to be really like the most fun parts of this movie. Uh, and eventually some parts of this movie like start to drop bombs on us, and we're like, oh crap. Whoa, so okay, so this person isn't who we think that they are this whole entire movie. Oh my god. Um, or really, you're just assessing the whole entire time, like, is everyone not real? Like, or all of them? Like, is everything in Rain's imagination? Is she seeing what she wants to see throughout this entire movie? Uh, like, because you see, like, the beginning scene where, like, I wish they could have actually said, like, if this kid has always had this thing, or like something had caused this trauma. But I guess you would naturally have to assume like that uh, this might have been hereditary, because once you go further on into this movie, you would probably naturally assume that it's probably a hereditary thing, or some other thing would quite possibly say that this like started off because of such and such event in Rain's mind. So, with that said, I would say, yeah, like, would I say to go out of your way to watch this movie? If you have 2 hours to kill, go ahead and do it. Uh, like, I would say that this movie is just a really slow film. Like, I was like, man, like, this is such a slow movie that I don't feel has enough into it to 100% tie on to my interest. Like, I would say this is probably a good movie to probably keep on, like, onto the distance. Like, if you probably miss, like, a good 5 to 10 minutes of this, like, while you're doing a project, you won't probably miss a whole chunk of something. Because more than likely, something happening on the screen, like a sound coming from somewhere, will tell you to, like, oh, okay, let me go and pay attention to this. Um, like this movie could be like a okay like background film if you're doing something, because it's either you get quite often a lot of dialogue in this movie, and more so than anything else. So with that said, I would just say that this is an okay film, like a solid okay film, because I had this like kind of real even back and forth about this, whether this movie is bad or not. And so like that's where I'm kind of like having this conundrum of just saying like this was an interesting piece, but it was also boring. So it's just, but eventually the story does escalate, and like so like there's something about it, but it's also just slow. So there's this back and forth. So just a solid okay movie. Um, so that's all I have to say about this thing. Let's get into spoilers about this film, because eventually once we get into spoilers, we're gonna drop the big reveal of things to happen during this film. Like I was kind of expecting there to be like a Beautiful Mind kind of thing, where all of a sudden we were to find out like a ton of people were all fake throughout this whole thing. That really just Rain is imagining too much of these things, and that's why she needs to forcibly go to a mental hospital of sorts, so that way she can just, because obviously this girl is to eventually stop taking her medication at some point, or it seems that her father eventually gets really aggressive towards Rain because of medication. So let's get into this. Let's get into spoilers about this. Let's try to wrap this up fairly quickly, and let's go out of our way to say that it is spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we need to spoil this movie. So really, first off, we all of a sudden are just kind of just really baffled and confused, uh, because the beginning of this movie starts out with Rain, who is all of a sudden like running in this like forest or field or something. And so all of a sudden there is to be a big, gigantic looking man who is chasing after Rain. I'm like, what the heck is this movie? Like, what is this? And so all of a sudden Rain is just like running in this place, and so Rain just gets chucked in this hole and then buried by this hooded man that we never see who he actually is. And so all of a sudden I'm like, that hole wasn't all that deep. And so why why dig just barely a flimsy way down of a hole? That seemed kind of chintzy to me. But like I guess they're just like, dude, we just didn't have the time to build this hole, and plus also like Rain has to get out of it. So because Rain ends up like digging her way easily out of this hole. I'm like, so what is this? Just like a chase of a thing? Like, is this just like a never ending chase? And then all of a sudden, like, we cut from that moment, and all of a sudden, Rain is like in this hospital bed. She's being held down from all these doctors and nurses and whatever. And I'm like, oh, so it's one of those kinds of films where this girl just off her medication. Because consistently her parents are there, and like they're kind of mentioning it's like she's just one hard sneeze away from being put into a mental hospital with all the complaints that this girl has ever had, and this and that. And so we have this girl who is to have supposedly been off her meds, and her mother is to mention, well, like when she gets on her meds, she ends up being a zombie. Here's one thing about this movie. This movie, eventually, once we get further into it, does have a ton of rewatchability, just for you to kind of question a lot of people along the way in this film. Like even though you know the answers, you just want to go back and like recheck to make sure, like okay, is this person who is not actually who we thought we were thinking, whatever, and so on and so forth. But we'll get through that. Uh, so Rain's mother, Michelle, is to kind of be the first one to notice that Rain is is to be awake, and so Michelle is to just say, "Oh, hey, hi, honey," and then John, who is Henry Conning Jr.'s character, is like, "Oh, hey, hi, hey," like, "Hey, sweetie." So we end up finding out that Rain, I guess, had supposedly gone off her meds just because, like, really, it just feels like she is going to have to be forced to just be a lab experiment and have them try to figure out the right dosage for her to like start nullifying or numbing up her illusions, because she continues to keep having illusions all the time. uh like every time she has to go on a bus and go by the cemetery, she has to see the hooded man kind of walking through that cemetery every single day. So it's just like, obviously these things in her mind just are not going away. So like evidently she must need like a stronger dose or something, but also like these medications will just leave her in a zombified state. So like, what is the real point of taking this medication when it's just going to leave her just like to where like she can't even function as a normal human being? So uh but anyways, we just consistently have Rain throughout this movie seeing all kinds of disturbing imagery. At one point, she's in the shower bathing, and like the shower curtain just like fills with blood all around her, and so like she has to like try to figure out if any of this is possible, which it isn't. So all of a sudden, the imagery goes away. She has this checklist that she has to go through to try and understand whether or not any of this stuff is actually there, real, or whatever. So all of a sudden, Rain is to consistently go through school, and so we kind of eventually start to push on with this character, and so Rain is to eventually have a boy named Caleb go and meet her during lunch one day, because Rain tries to sit next to some girls, and they're like, "Dude, we want nothing to do with you, loon." Like freaking like whatever personality that you're gonna try to be friends with us with, get out of here. Like that's probably a much more ruder way of which that I said it, but like they kind of like say that like that she's crazy, so they want nothing to do with her. So Caleb eventually goes and gives Rain a tarot card and says like, "Hey, pick a card." And so Rain picks the sun, and so uh, Caleb says, "Okay, put it back in the deck." And so now, like, Caleb is doing like this thing to distract Rain, and it's working. And so Caleb is to tell her again to pick a card, pick any card. And so she ends up grabbing it, and it's the moon. And so Caleb is like, well, like, that's your card, right? And she's like, no, it's not my card. And he's like, well, of course not, because that's the opposite of your card. Your actual card is underneath this water bottle. And so she ends up picking it up, and it's the sun. And so, like, sun, moon, and opposites. So all of a sudden, Rain is to mention to Caleb that she's not much of a magic fan, but, like, eventually, like, Caleb just starts doing things that seem like magical things, like doing the Rubik's Cube or something like that, where it's not exactly magical, it's just skill. So we push on here. So eventually, Caleb decides to spend more time with Rain, and so what ends up happening one night is that Rain is to eventually hear a loud screaming noise coming from her neighbor. And so now Rain is waking up her parents because obviously there is some girl that Rain had seen in this attic. And so both of her parents come to comfort her. And so John is just like, well, are you absolutely sure that you, like, go through your checklist? More than likely, this is something not actually real. Like, and so Rain is like, I saw it, believe me, I saw it. Like, there's some girl in this girl's attic. And so John is like, okay, fine. Well, we'll go over there tomorrow just to appease your mind. But if anything, like, one more complaint from this neighbor and you're going to have to go to you're going to go to the mental hospital. It's just like every like hard sneeze of this girl's life is just going to lead her to go to the hospital. We already have her seeking a therapist of sorts, which is Dr. Um, Pangloss. And so Dr. Pangloss, like, we don't even know if, like, she's actually real either. That maybe Rain just sat next to this one spot every day, and maybe this wasn't actually a real thing that she was doing. I don't know. Like, she was sitting down on this couch and talking things out, and you can never really confirm, like, if she was actually really speaking to a therapist or not towards the end of this movie, because you can not confirm a lot of things. So, uh, but anyways, so both John and Rain are to eventually go over to their neighbor's house, and so that leads us to a woman named Danny McConnell, who is actually a teacher at Rain's school. And so there's plenty of times where it seems that Rain ends up bumping up to this woman named Danny. And so, like, it seems that consistently Rain is to be, like, terrified of this woman when she continues to bump into her through school. So Rain is to mention that there is some girl in Danny's attic, and Danny's like, I don't have anyone. Like, what are you talking about? So, like, we have Danny who's just like, well, I can take you up to my attic if that's what you want. And so, all of a sudden, like, they go up to this woman's attic, and all of a sudden, we just see, like, a ton of dolls all around this attic. And so Danny's like, well, I guess this is not helping me, like, helping to convince that I'm, like, a sane person, but, like, this is all my mother's stuff, supposedly. And, like, evidently her mother used to, like, put um, really fine, like, clothes on these dolls instead of the actual kids. So, anyways, so Rain is to kind of check throughout this room, and she still is convinced that Danny is keeping like somebody here. To where recently she's just thinking that, well, like she must have stored this girl somewhere else, but I saw her. And so John is just like I don't know, it just seems like this woman is just like, yeah, maybe she's weird. Like so what? Like there isn't any real hard evidence that is to like say like 100% that this girl is keeping someone. So because what ends up happening is that Rain is just deciding that this girl is keeping someone. And so the more and more both Rain and Caleb are to hang out with one another, uh, Caleb is to eventually help Rain like start looking for this girl in certain lost states in a computer. Here's also the weird thing though. So Caleb at the beginning of this movie had said that he didn't have a cell phone, or otherwise he would have asked for Rain's number. But then all of a sudden, Caleb bizarrely is able to text Rain in this movie, which did not make sense to me. I'm like, didn't he say in the very beginning of this film that he did not have a phone? And then all of a sudden he's having the ability to text this girl? I'm very confused. Like, is he using some person's phone? Like, what? Like, did he get a burner phone? I'm confused. Um, because I thought he said something about he didn't believe in phones or something. Maybe he's like, maybe he has a laptop at his home that he's like messaging her through some other like app or something like Facebook or something. I don't know. It just seemed weird to me. But anyways, so Rain, because I'm kind of like quickly going through a lot of things here. So, uh, but Rain and Caleb are like kind of consistently going out with one another. Like the first thing that they do is Caleb is just driving Rain around, and all of a sudden it actually does rain. And so Caleb is like, yeah, like my car, like the windshield wiper of my car, the windshield wipers don't work. So like we might as just well like wait for like the rain to just like stop, because this guy is like putting the pieces back to this car back together. Like it took him 6 months to make this car actually work, and so eventually he's just like trying to put more money together to fix the body of this car, because you can obviously see underneath Rain's feet there's this like hole in the car. And so I'm like, man, that must be a really sucky thing during wintertime, which probably doesn't happen wherever they're probably at. Cause like, man, if it was wintertime there, like say if it was like in Minnesota or somewhere north, like I would just be like, man, it sucks to be you when you have that big hole in your car. But I'm sure a lot of people probably have holes in their car too, that eventually they probably just put a blanket or do something like duct tape or something during certain times of the year or whichever. Anyways, pushing on. So we have Caleb, who is to eventually go and do this Rubik's Cube, and Rain is just like, you know what, I just want to go home. Um, so Rain ends up going home, and Caleb is like, well, did I do anything wrong? And Rain is like, no, I just want to go home. And so Caleb is like, okay. So it seems like Caleb is very easygoing, maybe a little too easygoing, like because eventually when this girl is to eventually start to uh, eventually like freak out, because eventually she's starting to hear voices. Eventually she starts to freak out when she sees uh, Danny again. Rain just all of a sudden is eventually to just start freaking out. Uh, and eventually she has to break the news to Caleb that she's actually like a certain kind of schizophrenic. So, but we'll get to that. I'm rushing a lot through this because I just want to I just want to get certain parts done and out of the way. But yeah, so what ends up happening is that we eventually see Rain, who is starting to like make portraits of her mother, and John is to eventually start to do this catering service with a friend of his. And Rain is telling John that he should go out and do this catering service. And John is like, "Are you sure? Like, I don't know. I think I should probably just stay home." And Rain is like, "No, like, go out and just like go and just do this. Like I know you like cook for me and mom all the time." And John is like, "Yeah, I do cook for you and mom all the time." Like, so yeah, so but anyways, so uh pushing on. So cuz there's so anyways uh so both Caleb and Rain are searching through the computer to find this girl that supposedly Rain is saying is missing, and they of course find the picture of this girl. And now that Rain has this information about this girl, now we actually have to try and sneak into Danny's home to try and find this girl in this woman's home. And so Rain, I guess, had supposedly worked out perfectly Danny's schedule. So that leads like Caleb and Danny to try to sneak in this woman's house. And so they end up just, I guess, this woman's door is just completely unlocked because I guess this neighborhood is very trusting, bizarrely. But you would think if this woman like had something evil behind her door, you would have think that she would have kept the door locked, right? That's just me. So, but bizarrely, this woman's door is unlocked. Caleb and Rain go through the house, and once they are trying to get into the attic again, Danny is to show up with groceries. And so all of a sudden, that's when Caleb finds out that that the person that they're going through the house of like works at their school. And so Caleb is like, "You didn't tell me that this was like a teacher. Like, you didn't tell me that." So, but anyways, so what eventually ends up happening is they just keep wanting to go into this woman's house, to where eventually John is to eventually having to force to break the news uh to Rain, because Rain had come to Caleb, or Rain had Caleb kind of break into her house. And so Caleb and Rain had spent some time together in Rain's house, and eventually it leads to Caleb going and kissing Rain. And all of a sudden, Michelle, who is Rain's mother, walks down the stairs, and Michelle is like, "Oh, so like this must be Caleb then." And Rain is like, "Yeah." And so like, "I'm sorry if I'm interrupting anything." And then Michelle just walks up the stairs. All of a sudden, Caleb, I just kind of weirded out of the fact that that Michelle's mom kind of like stormed in on them whole like kissing. Caleb is to walk out. And so, but eventually John is going to have to confess something fairly soon. So, eventually Caleb is to ask Rain, "Okay, like, what do you mean by you being like schizophrenic? Like, what do you mean by you like is it voices? Is it, what is it?" And so like Rain tries to explain it in a roundabout way, like all the things that ail her, because I guess maybe Caleb is like, "Man, I'm thinking about winning bells with this woman." Because we have Caleb, who at the very end of this movie is just thinking, "Hey, how about you and me, like, we go on more dates?" because of what ends up happening at the very end of this movie. Uh, so eventually, what ends up happening is like Rain is to start seeing things consistently, and now Harry is asking Rain like have you taken your medication? And Rain is like, yeah, I have. And John is like, don't lie to me. Like, have you taken your medication? Even to the point where, like, John grabs Rain and forces her to where her medication is. And John says, take your medication. And Rain is like, I've already taken it today. And John is like, I want to see you do it. Because I want to be sure that you're taking your medication. So all of a sudden we have Rain, who is just taking a ton of her medication, tossing it in her mouth. And so, like, John, like, freaking slaps her, and, like, he also tries to, like, take all the medication out of her mouth. Because Rain is just like, is this what you want, Dad? Is this what you want for me to for this to be over? For you to just, like, no longer have to deal with me now? Because, like, it seems like John is just, like, really at this point where he's just like, I think we need to just send her off to, like, Westbrook or wherever this hospital is. Because eventually John is to finally break down at some portion in this movie and finally tell Rain that her mother had died years ago. And so Rain is consistently seeing her mother, and her mother's not really there. And it's like, whoa! Like, that is like a whole entire movie of a thing where, like, Rain is doing, like, her mother's portrait, and her mom is sick, and all kinds of things. And all of a sudden we just have that bomb dropped that, like, Michelle isn't actually a real person. That John, for points in this movie, had to pretend that Michelle was still there to just play along with Rain consistently. And I'm like, whoa, that is like a huge drop in this story. And so all of a sudden we start to then finally realize that, yeah, Michelle isn't real, because eventually, like, Rain is starting to see Michelle everywhere, even the point where I think we end up finding out what ended up happening to Michelle, that she ended up hanging herself. And I'm like, whoa, this is some freaking dark imagery in this freaking movie. Like, okay, like, whoa. Like, man, back up a little bit, movie. Like, good grief. Like, I didn't need to see that. So, because, yeah, once Rain gets it into her head, like, hey, Caleb, like, tonight, we're going to sneak into this woman's house tonight, get this kid out, and, like, basically have the cops call on this woman. Because we have Danny, who is to have called the cops on Rain to just be like, I want her gone. Like, freaking, like, there's accusations being spread about me now because of this girl, and I'm done with it. Like, I just don't want to deal with this anymore. I'm going to be pressing charges and all kinds of stuff, which never actually happened. So Rain goes off to this woman's home. Granted, she's actually still in her home. But yeah, so Caleb is to break a window of here, and then they sneak out earlier. But so Rain makes it back into this home, and Caleb is to shortly to follow. And here's the thing. At some point, Rain is almost thinking that Caleb is not real. But Caleb is actually real. But like, there's this whole back and forth of, is Caleb real? Is Caleb, like, kind of like when you get to The Shining, where like the kid's conscience, like, this could be Caleb the whole entire time, and there's consistently having to convince people that Caleb is actually a real person, and then eventually towards the very tail end of this movie, eventually John is to see that Caleb is real, to convince us that Caleb is a real person. And like that was just like, oh my god, so Caleb is real. So it's not like, it's not, everything is not true. So Rain goes into this house and is to go through this like basement part of this woman's house and eventually find the little girl in this little room. And so Rain is like, okay, little girl, I'm gonna get you out. And so this girl is like, okay. And so like Rain is to eventually go and try to get this girl out, but then all of a sudden like Danny like starts to like go through the house with like some little like golf club or something, and like she's trying to sneak through the house trying to like figure out like who is here. Like I think Caleb is trying to make his way into this house, which kind of alerts her, but like we have kind of Rain who is kind of sneaking through this house too. So eventually Danny makes it back to this little like doorway and kind of opens it and sees that both Rain and this girl are in here. And so now Danny's strategy is to basically say that that Rain, what are you doing here? Like this, that, like, if anything, like, whatever you saw in there is not real. Like, whatever you're seeing, like, you need to be back on your medication. You go to the mental hospital. If anything, hey, like, if you leave here now, like, I will just keep this between us. And so, because this girl's screwed. So, and we also have one moment where, like, Rain was also trying to console one of her friends at school that was seemingly having a really hard time and maybe having a panic attack. But when Rain was trying to comfort this girl, all of a sudden, like, all the rest of the other school people were there, and then this girl was just like, you know what, not everyone is crazy like you to just try to, try to just, like, save face kind of thing. And also, when Danny is to confront Rain at the school and just like, hey, maybe we should talk, Rain is all of a sudden seeing this like broken part of this ceiling, which I thought was fascinating. That all of a sudden wasn't actually really there. But so, pushing on. So, Danny is consistently telling Rain that, hey, like, we'll just play this off like you weren't even here. You can get out of here, and you'll and just never come here again. And we'll just treat it square. All of a sudden, we have like Rain who pops out like a box cutter. I know because I've seen one, and this is like an unretractable one. Which I'm like, man, that seems really unsafe to have in a movie set. Because I would get crap consistently when I'm at my work of like not having a retractable like box cutter, because a lot of those freaking sucked. Like retractable box cutters like couldn't even cut freaking like a paper, let alone like a piece of cardboard. And they gave us the crappiest box cutters imaginable. But like then people wanted us to do our jobs fairly quickly, which I'm like, I'm sorry, like this box cutter like can't even cut bread, and you're wanting me to like to quickly do this job with the crappiest looking box cutter, the chintziest ones. But so like it would just get to the point where I'm just like, I just want to get my box cutter from home that I know I have. Like it just became a letter opener, but like, like freaking, or like I would eventually just get like boxes or whatever from like Amazon or whatever, like everyone else. Um so yeah, I would like, yeah, I have this thing where I can just open this up, because eventually like box cutters would just bizarrely go missing through every one of these kinds of stores. Like I'm sure you'd probably see somebody selling like 50 of them on eBay probably somewhere. Like yeah, I took a bunch of these from my work and just like I don't know, like some shifty people or whatever, maybe they went to other jobs that were just like this and like, hey, here's some box cutters, like a quarter for one. Like, really? Something shifty about this. So I don't know. I'm not like saying that somebody did that, but because I wouldn't do that because that's garbage. Uh, and I'm not accusing anybody. Mood point. Man, did I go off left wing here? Let's get back into the story. So, box cutter, unretractable one. That probably is a really crappy one too. Because I know how you can detach and probably fake razor blade, right? So, anyways, pushing on again. So there's like this rustle for this box cutter. All of a sudden, we see Caleb coming from behind Danny and like choking her out. And so, like, eventually, Danny is to get this box cutter and like wrestle with Caleb, and eventually he gets kind of cut, but I don't think not cut like deep enough to like bush out the jugular, if you know what I mean, to really slice and dice this man. So, but eventually, what ends up happening is that Rain is racing off with this girl, and eventually, what ends up happening after this is like police are to eventually be called, and like for like I guess probably Caleb probably called the cops. Yeah, so Danny's jig is up. Danny is freaking arrested, and all of a sudden we just have John who's like, oh my god, like my daughter, like she told the truth. Like this is kind of like a Disturbia kind of thing, but like John is like, oh my god. So like I just thought that my daughter was crazy and she was telling me the truth. Oh my god. And then all of a sudden John is to see Caleb, and then John is like, wow, Caleb is real too? Oh my god. Like, John was saying that, like, yeah, Caleb isn't a real person, he's all in your head, and like this girl is all in your head, and like you're lying and whatever. And so like now I guess next time around, John is just gonna be like, okay, well, like, let's have like some proof, or let's kind of go into just kind of like have this girl to just like kind of check things out, because you never know when you're gonna have a crazy neighbor, I guess. But like still like Rain kind of went really off the handle with this whole thing, where it's just like she was just like, I'm gonna go on my own and solve this whole case because I'm freaking Nancy Drew or something. And like, yeah, she was right, but what happens if the next time that she's wrong and she goes too far, and all of a sudden she's like Nancy Drew of this neighborhood, and then all of a sudden like the next time she's going to end up because I'm sure they're going to make a billion sequels out of this movie, right? I don't think so, because I like this movie could be really great and a lot of people could like it. Maybe there could be a sequel, but like I don't like I think after the first real thing of this, I don't think that they can go into a franchise of this movie, because I think eventually like people will just be like okay, it's either that she's like really just not seeing this the whole time, or like this is actually happening. And plus they would really have to like escalate this whole thing to give us like a much more interesting story than the first movie. But again, I'm kind of wondering if they're like, this kind of feels like there's probably like this was adapted from a book. Like this movie kind of feels like a book adaptation, but like I could be possibly wrong about that, but I just have that kind of feeling. But yeah, so with that said, I am going to get out of here. Yeah, the last thing that we see is kind of Caleb uh, going on and being like taken out through the ambulance. We also have a moment where Rain was to eventually just tear apart her room, like scratch things through her entire room. And eventually there's there's two parts in this movie. We are to see like Caleb, who is kind of having a painted face in a portrait that is to grab onto her actual self in some hallucination that she's having, and like yelling at herself. And we also eventually also have Rain, who is to see a mirrored image of herself in a very much like darkened makeup, and Rain is breaking this mirror to make this girl go away, which I thought was kind of interesting. uh, and also we have a point where John is taking upon himself to redecorate Rain's room, but Rain doesn't eventually go back into the room right away, and so she ends up kind of sleeping in the guest room. But eventually, at the very end of the movie, Rain goes back into her room, and like John had mentioned about a photo that was to be of him and Michelle and Rain all together at one like nice little beach spot. Where eventually the tail end of the movie is to just kind of reuse that footage that they probably just didn't actually use. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here to make this a shorter review. I'm going to go out of my way to say goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody. I think there probably is a lot of points that I kind of just quickly just grazed over. I know there might be some points here where I didn't go to full detail of this film with this review, just because I was like, nah, like people might like this movie or people may not care. I don't know. There might be mixed kind of things about this, so I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.